Behind me is the brand new Site C dam on the Peace River here in British Columbia, and it's BC Hydro's latest dam, in fact its 82nd dam, standing at a whopping 1,100 megawatts, increasing the province's electricity supply by 10%, or in other words, supplying almost 500,000 homes with electricity. It also might just be BC Hydro's last ever dam. So we're here to take a little closer look, and this is Everything Electric. Our 3 free YouTube channels on EVs and clean tech are funded by our fun-packed test drive-tastic events in Farnborough, London, the Southwest, the North, Melbourne and Sydney. Next up, Everything Electric Farnborough. And new for UK viewers, you can buy a battery electric vehicle or more at everythingelectric.store. Back to the episode. Global electricity demand is absolutely soaring, and in fact it's predicted that we need to add about 1,000 gigawatts per year over the next decade, which is like adding 30 times the UK's demand to the world each year. Absolutely huge. And it's not just because of electric vehicles, it's also because of AI and data centres, electrification of home heating, rising population and growing industries as well. And ultimately, this is a really good thing. Electrification is obviously cleaner, and it is a much more efficient technology than its fossil fuel counterparts. But how we meet that demand is often contentious. This is not just about plonking infrastructure anywhere, but every source has some form of difficult question to ask and some form of trade-off. Solar is fast and scalable, but intermittent, so it needs storage or smart grid backup. Wind delivers clean, high-capacity energy, especially offshore, but needs long-distance transmission and often hits planning roadblocks onshore. Gas and coal may offer baseload, but emit 10 to 20 times more CO2 than renewables, a climate risk that cannot be ignored. Nuclear is low carbon and steady, but extremely costly, slow to build, and expensive to decommission. And then, of course, there's hydropower for those blessed with beautiful rivers and mountains. It's clean, it's dispatchable, it's predictable, and it's long-lasting. The dams built here will last some 70 to 100 years. But on a per megawatt basis, it definitely takes up the most amount of space. And in fact, droughts and falling snowpacks are paradoxically rising challenges. And of course, we cannot ignore the social and environmental consequences that come alongside it too. And in fact, we just drove past a farm which had to give up some of its farmland in order to allow the Site C reservoir to fill. That brings us to Site C. Construction began in 2015 and now operational, it's the 3rd project on the Peace River, sitting downstream from the massive Wollaston Reservoir that sits behind the W.A.C. Bennett Dam.
I've been on the project for 9 years in various roles, and in the last 5.5 years I've been the Director of Construction Management, so I've seen most of the construction through. And at our peak we had over 3,000 people on site at one time working, and over 5,000 people working on the project as a whole. Just the scale of this, as you've seen today, massive earthworks, big concrete placements, and all kinds of electrical, mechanical equipment that's been installed and units online now.
Right now we're in the Powerhouse, and behind me are the 6 generating units that make up Site C. And these little green boxes give you an indication as to the sort of mechanical wizardry that goes on underneath them. These green boxes house the brush gears. They are connected to the generating units, which are just beneath us here, which is connected to a prop shaft, which then is connected to the Francis turbine. Those turbines are being spun by, of course, water, which comes down the penstocks. We are a few floors below the Powerhouse in the generating floor. In front of me I can see this octagonal concrete structure, and behind that is the generator. And here we can see the control panel that's controlling that particular generator. There are of course 6 of them, and we're currently stood by Unit 3. Now on here you can see all of the things that are going on in there, including how much power is being generated, which right now is 170 megawatts. Now these things are capable of going up to about 205 megawatts, but this is currently at about 169 to 170. They can control all sorts of bits and bobs here, which is why this is locked, to prevent people like me getting overexcited and pressing buttons. Now, there's loads of stuff that we've been able to see in terms of the various bits of the powerhouse, and obviously we can see the reservoir and the downstream river as it is today. But there's lots of stuff that we haven't been able to see. For example, how you had to redirect rivers. Can you give us an insight into all of the preliminary work you had to do to even make this possible?
Yeah, to start with, you have to prepare the site, and one of the first things that we did on the bank across from us on the above the dam is we had to take 11 million cubic meters of material off to flatten the slope. We had to build access roads just to get access to the site. We had a construction bridge that linked both banks for the early construction activities. We had to construct 2 11-meter diameter tunnels in order to divert the river around the site to start the construction of the dam. Those tunnels are between 750 and 800 meters long. They're concrete lined, and they're able to pass 3,000 cubic meters per second.
We've come down right to the bottom, and I have to say, this is giving me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies, because behind me is an 11-meter diameter pipe filled with water. And the reason is because right behind this wall, the penstocks come down, the water is transported into the scroll casing, into the turbine on the other side of that wall. So this thing is carrying an awful lot of water. Now, if you've noticed any of the screws on the side, that's because it has to allow for a bit of expansion, either for thermal expansion or the fact that these huge structures are going to move a little bit, and it needs to accommodate the bend and flex of the building by having a little bit of contingency in there. But what are some of the other big, meaty geotechnical environmental challenges that you've had to contend with?
On the geotechnical front, one of the big ones we had to contend with, although we had done a lot of drilling and geotech work ahead of time on the foundation of this site and discovered that there were bedding planes. Those are areas that the rock can slip one block on another. The design had contemplated that and gone down to intersect what we thought was the lowest bedding plane that would react with our facility. We discovered during construction small movement in a bedding plane below that. On the fly, we had to develop designs and implement work to install 96 about 2-meter diameter piles that were drilled, installed, intersected that lower bedding plane, and then concrete was installed and capped, and that locked those 2 bedding planes in place. That was an incredible amount of work to do in the middle of a project and the construction.
It is totally bizarre being here, because right now it feels as if I'm surrounded by some magnificent piece of very impressive brutalist architecture, and it is in fact a dam. And more specifically, behind me are the penstocks. And the penstocks are the bit of this infrastructure that's very, very critical, because they are what sends water from the reservoir, using that potential energy, down the penstocks, down these pipes, into the turbine to convert it from potential energy into kinetic energy, which then can be transformed into electrical energy. Now here we have the transformers that's stepping up the voltage from 13.8 kilovolts up to 500 kilovolts, which is then going through these transmission lines down to a substation before it's distributed across the rest of the province. So before Site C was here, this just would have been the Peace River. So in order to build the dam, which is actually the big beige thing, it's an earth-filled dam, so it's literally made from the earth that's excavated in order to make the reservoir. But the river actually had to be diverted in tunnels, which is kind of absolutely crazy that this huge river could be diverted in order to construct that dam. But here, upstream of the dam, is the reservoir. And the way to think about the reservoir is almost like an upside down doorstop. So at its deepest point, it's 56 meters. And as you head that way, its shallowest point is 18 meters. Now, the really interesting thing about Site C is that it's actually the 3rd dam on the river. So 83 kilometers that way, you get to the Peace Canyon Dam. And then another 23 kilometers or so, going through the Dinosaur Reservoir, you get to the W.A.C. Bennett Dam. Upstream of the W.A.C. Bennett Dam is the 8th largest body of water on the planet, and that is the reservoir that feeds the W.A.C. Bennett Dam. So what's interesting about all of this is that actually you have the same water travelling through each dam, but it's all about the hydraulic head, the amount of power that can be generated by how much it's dropping, by the turbines that you're using, which is why all of these have slightly different generating capacities.
The significance and the real value of Site C and its location here is that upstream we have a very large reservoir at the Bennett Dam, as you said, and that's like a very large battery, storage battery. It's passed through another facility upstream called Peace Canyon, and then Site C is the third. And this facility reuses the same water that has come through those facilities above us and adds both energy and capacity to our system.
Now, the Peace Canyon Dam was completed in 1980 and has a generating capacity of around 700 megawatts, which means it can supply electricity to around 300,000 homes. And what is so fascinating about all of this is that we followed this beautiful reservoir all the way here. We've never been here before. We didn't know what it looked like before, and for all intents and purposes, this is a beautiful body of water. But in order to transform what was just the Peace River into the Site C reservoir, it's required an enormous amount of flooding. In fact, around 13,700 acres, which was flooded between August 2024, took 11 weeks to November 2024. And of course, that raises a load of geotechnical challenges, but environmental concerns, and of course, very, very careful consideration from the local community as well. At the end of the day, we're talking about delivery of power to around 500,000 homes, and clean power at that, because of course this is hydroelectricity. But it is a profound impact on the environment that is around it. How have you had to think about protecting the environment and the local community and all of that kind of thing as you've gone through this project?
Yeah, there's a big lead up to a project like this called the environmental assessment process, which we went through, and many studies were done of this area, both things around fish, wildlife, and plants and the terrestrial. And all of that went into developing our plans for this project. One of the things that you'll see down below us is we actually have a permanent upstream fishway. And that was constructed to allow fish to move safely up to the reservoir and then back down again to complete their life cycle.
We're 23 kilometres upstream of the Peace Canyon Dam to this, the W.A.C. Bennett Dam. And this is significant for two reasons. First of all, the Williston Reservoir is the 8th largest reservoir on the planet. And two, the W.A.C. Bennett Dam is named after W.A.C. Bennett himself. And he was the Premier of British Columbia between 1952 and 1972. And he really recognised that parts of British Columbia were isolated from each other, and he could unlock the potential of the province by deploying infrastructure like rail, highway, and critically, affordable electricity. So he nationalised and founded BC Hydro and set about building a load of hydroelectric dams, including this one, the likes of which just had not been seen in this province before. Now, this was completed in 1968, so the benefits of that affordable electricity were not even seen in W.A.C. Bennett's lifetime. He passed away in 1979. And for me, that really demonstrates someone who is so fiercely committed to the future. But in the 60s, when this was under construction, environmental and societal considerations simply were not given the same sort of thought that they are today. And you don't get away with flooding a region of this size without some serious and profound consequences. There were increased levels of methyl mercury in fish due to the decomposing forest, now underwater. There were increased dust levels now due to the exposed banks. And there was a loss of fishing, trap lines, and of course farmland as well. But more important than all of that, there were First Nations communities who were simply not involved in the decision of any of this, and they weren't even informed that the flooding was going to take place. And that has led to generational trauma, which is still felt today. While BC Hydro is known for hydroelectric power, big dams aren't their only focus. Site C is important, but it's just one part of a broader plan to meet rising demand and modernise the grid. They've boosted energy efficiency programmes to reduce peak demand, rolled out time-varying rates to shift usage to off-peak hours, launched a call for new clean power, awarding 10 new projects, 9 wind, 1 solar, with 8 of the wind projects majority First Nations owned. They've expanded net metering, letting solar users sell excess power, invested in grid-scale batteries and virtual power plants, and continue to trade power through the Western interconnection to balance supply and demand. We have actually covered those interconnections in a full episode before, so do check out that one after this one. What we've seen here today is a fascinating insight into precisely what it takes to build this monumental piece of infrastructure. We've seen precisely what it means to generate 1,100 megawatts of power and what it takes to get there. But as the world needs more electricity, it's going to be this complex interwoven web of making various trade-offs, of looking for the right combination of big mega projects and local solutions, of looking at home energy improvements, and also identifying the mechanisms with which we pay for electricity. Whatever the combination is, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. It will be a buffet of stuff that's going to involve various technologies, values, trade-offs and solutions. Whatever it ends up being, let's hope we end up doing net good in the pursuit of net zero. That's all that we have time for today. Please do like and subscribe, and if you have been, thank you for watching.